Well, welcome back. My jet lag I think, is gone. Okay, I'm in high spirits. Okay, now, do you remember this song? There is a hole in your bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There is a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, a hole. Well, fix it, dear Henry, dear. Do you remember that? Well, you see, I thought that the title for this video should be on geopolitics. There is a hole in your bucket, dear Trump, dear Trump. No, dear Donald, dear Donald. There is a hole in your bucket, and the hole is Iran. Now I'm going to tell you why, but I'm going to go back to the beginning and explain it, and you will probably not see the connection until the very end, my conclusion of the argument. As usual, I depend for my knowledge on my reading and listening to very many people, both in English, in Spanish, and in French. And I have to say that there is one guy here who I follow, and he's smart. He is the director of the Ekai Center, Ekai Center. I will put all this down in the description box, and his name is Adrian Zelaia. And I was listening to him, 2 or 3 of his videos and interviews, because he's big in Spain and in Latin America. He's everywhere. You cannot miss him. And he's the equivalent, I would say, people know of him as, Colonel McGregor or Scott Ritter, or, people that you hear and are there all the time. And I learned so much from this guy. So I'm going to use his bullet points in explaining what might happen now with the election of former President Trump, to see what is going to happen now in the 2 wars that are going on. Okay, so we know from the first mandate of Donald Trump, President Trump, that he has obviously won in a landslide. Many say we still don't have all the results. There are a few states still counting, but obviously it looks as if also the Republicans are going to win the Senate and the House. So President Trump is going to have some options that perhaps he didn't have in the first mandate. In the first mandate, you remember the main thing was drain the swamp. You remember that? It was an anti-bureaucracy, anti-corruption sort of urging from the people, a sort of an anti-oligarchy. He didn't do it, but many say that he couldn't do it. He wasn't in a position to do it. And they refer to the very many people that he had around him and so on. And they say, well, it was good enough that he actually managed to even stay there with all the Russiagate and the impeachments and so on. So they say he didn't quite do it, but he wasn't in a position to do it. Okay, so in the second mandate, from the perspective of Europe and perhaps even Latin America, what he might do, we're all talking about what is he going to do about Ukraine. With Israel, we kind of know that he's very much on the side of Israel and so on. First of all, about the situation in Europe. And there is a process that is underway at the moment in Europe, which is actually accelerating. We know that Russia is winning the war. Initially, it was not, from their point of view, it was not about territory. It wasn't about gaining more and more territory. It was what goes by the name of war of attrition. In other words, to wear down the opponent, the adversary, the adversary's army. But now things are getting easier for them, and it looks as if it is also a question of more territorial gains are increasing. There are doubts as to whether, doubts on our side, those of us looking at it, as to whether the Russian army will move more towards the Black Sea, Odessa and the Black Sea, or it will continue on, towards the Dnieper River, towards Kiev, really. This could, one or another, or both, or none, whatever the strategy is, could very much depend, obviously, on not only military, but also geopolitical strategies. Be that as it may, the consequences of Russia's victory, if there is going to be a negotiation with the United States of any kind, if it's going to take place, and we think there is some negotiation going to take place, they're going to talk, this is crucial. In any case, this victory leaves a weakened Ukraine, a defeated European Union, and a defeated NATO. They will have to digest and assimilate the consequences of this defeat. And then these negotiations as to what is going to happen next will have to be formalized within a framework agreed upon with the United States. What is going to happen next? So the main question is not that thanks to Trump, there is going to be peace within a certain context, X, Y, or Z. That is not it. That thanks to Trump, there is going to be peace. But that this context that is going forward now will be accelerated faster. What do I mean? What context? Okay, different context. Oh my goodness, my voice starts again. Okay, this is the context. There are regions in the Ukraine that are going to be incorporated to be part of Russia. The western part of Ukraine, the anti-Russian part, there's going to be some what relationship is that going to have vis-a-vis Russia, Europe, and all the rest of it, okay? Because what is left, we all know that Russia cannot just leave a very anti-Russian militancy there, because in 2 or 3 years' time it will explode again. So what are the terms of what is going to happen with that part of Ukraine? That will be part of that negotiation. In other words, this new formal institutional status for the rest of Ukraine, what is that going to be? There will have to be an agreement about the strategic security in Europe, that of which Putin spoke in 2021 before the war started, as to, let's try to do this, talk about the strategic security pact in order to avoid war. We'll have to go back to that, but obviously the terms will be different. Now, 2 things that you're going to say you're insane. No, I'm not, because you're going to see why. the end of NATO as it is right now. In other words, that for NATO to be there to attack Russia will no longer be possible. What are going to be those terms? And perhaps 2 or 3 years later, the consequences of that might be the end of the European Union as we know it today. As we know it today, because you remember that to begin with, until the 1990s, 1992 to be precise, it was an economic agreement between countries. It was when it was turned into a political union that problems started, with each European country giving up or forced to give up in some sort of way their independence, their sovereignty, more and more and more. Perhaps the EU will have to rearrange itself along the initial terms. Okay, so all these might very well take place, but it's going to be... this is going to happen perhaps inevitably, but it will be much better if it is formally agreed with the United States, in other words, in a less aggressive, more fluid sort of way. So this is the question. This is, let's say, this is what perhaps we could hope for in this second mandate of Donald Trump as president, in this negotiation. Trump has alluded to this. He would like this issue of Ukraine to be resolved even before he takes office. He said that. Well, this is doubtful that is going to happen, because at this moment Russia is not really that interested in negotiating anything. Russia has been investing, making enormous investments in this war of attrition, and it is now that Russia is beginning to reap the territorial benefits of this war of attrition. It is perhaps the worst moment for Russia to negotiate and the best for the Ukraine. But it all depends on the context. Okay, so, and it's also another thing is that it's not the same that the negotiation starts now or starts on the 20th of January or after the 20th of January, because in these 2 months the situation could change very, very much. Because in these 2 months, the Russian army is going to make territorial advances, and we are seeing this every day, and the Ukraine army is collapsing. So the starting point of the negotiation is going to be different now or in 2 months' time. In any case, Russia surely has had clear for a long time where it wants to end up, what its goals are. It is very possible that a negotiation will ultimately take place. It has been said that Trump and Putin have not spoken, but it is nevertheless true that an important part of Trump's support comes from some sectors in the army and some sectors in the intelligence services that are with him, and that for many years they have had contacts with the intelligence services of Russia and China. The obvious thing here is would be that during at least the last few months, recent few months, they have talked among themselves and have probably already designed or thought about or spoken about what that formal institutional framework of the future of Ukraine might look like, and that strategic security framework of Europe, what that will be too. Perhaps they have already talked about it. Perhaps they have already pre-negotiated something. All these, the Ukraine, NATO, the European Union, all these things possible to the extent that if an explosion does not occur in the Near East, in the Middle East. We know Trump's stand. He's always being very anti-Iran and very pro-Israel. And this would not be a problem as long as it does not move into the field of war, let us say. So can these two things be coordinated? They are connected, Europe and the Middle East. Can they be coordinated? This is what I mean. Because he'll have to coordinate them. And this is the difficulty. If he really wants to negotiate the European issue, it is not possible that at the same time that he is negotiating an end to the Ukrainian issue, he is leading an escalation of war in the Middle East. That escalation is an escalation against Iran, as we all know, a conflict in which Israel drags the United States, or that is a possibility, Israel wanting to drag the United States into a war with Iran, which is what we hear all the time, or alternatively, it could also be that Israel gives the US a pretext to enter the war. Who is leading who here? Or both are in tandem at the same time. Israel dragging the United States, or, hey, this is a good opportunity for us. This is a good pretext to enter the war, to control the Middle East. We have Israel's objective, and that is that it wants to free itself from its enemy, Iran. And the US objective is to gain control of the Middle East. Now, Iran is not a tiny little thing of a country there. It is an important country. If the US defeats Iran in a war, it gains political control in the whole of the Middle East. The US has been after this, controlling the Middle East for the last 25 years. Already with this project. And it was going quite well until Syria. For 25 years, because you can already see it there written down in black and white in the project for the New American Century, which was a kind of a think tank between 1997 and 2006. And basically it was about the new post-Cold War neoconservative project. From there they were called the neocons. Yeah. So it was led by William Crystal and Robert Kagan. They're still there. Neoconservative project. And they talked about the war of ideas. They were very much against the Détente. They wanted to. They referred to the U.S. exercising a benevolent hegemony in the world. And I quote from one of their documents, the first objective of U.S. foreign policy should be to preserve and enhance that predominance by strengthening American security, supporting its friends, advancing its interests, and standing up for its principles around the world. Okay, so this was after the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union. Okay, so they are thinking obviously about American hegemony in the world. They thought at the time that American foreign policy was adrift. They were okay with the Reagan view of the United States of America in the world. So they thought that he had slipped, and so they were trying to reaffirm American power in the post-Cold War world. They were worried that the United States was no longer seen in the world as a superpower. They were talking about superpower and hyperpower. In other words, whether it was to be the one hegemon or whether it's they had to avoid this going towards this, what we now call a multipolar world. So the strategy was to keep the United States as the one sole superpower. But now that this new unipolar situation provided the US with a new role as they saw it, and this new role, as they put it, wrote it down, was maintaining peace and security in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Okay, our mission as the only sole hegemon in the world is to maintain peace and security in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. In other words, we have to control these areas. And then simultaneously, what came also into political discourse was this concept. This is at the beginning of the 2000s, this concept of preventive war. That is called the Bush Doctrine. Preventive war. Okay, so you may not have gone to war against us or declared war, but if you are not with us, you are against us. If you don't follow our lead, you are against us. So we could change, a regime change or sanctions or whatever it might be. Preventive war. Then, after the Iraq War, these first neocons were criticized. Many saw the Iraq War was a disaster and so on, so they closed shop in 2006. But they came back, and they came back in 2009, led by the same people, Crystal and Kagan. And now they called the think tank or the movement Foreign Policy Initiative. Foreign Policy Initiative, the FPI. But something had changed here, because the original stand was the United States as a country. In the during the Reagan era, it was the United States, the most powerful country in the world, that kind of thing. But now, since the 90s, and certainly in the 2000s, it began to move from the United States to the global, how shall we call them? The global, let's say Wall Street, let's say the corporative world, the global financial cabal, whatever it is. Okay, so I don't know how Davos, or whoever those people are, the financiers, the corporations. Okay, so there is a difference, because the first ones was the United States as a country, okay, and now the United States or the American people as a country is not that important. It is satisfying the interest of this global elite, and the American people, they pay their taxes, and the government works more towards the interest of these elites. So something had changed there. Okay, so going back, it was clear then that countries would have to be subdued or subjugated or destroyed, if need be, one after another, to, in the end, take control of the Middle East, and from then on, destabilize and subjugate Russia and China. So now, to subjugate Iran. Why? Because it was clear that when it came together with Russia in serious defense, they were attacking Syria, it was going reasonably well, and then both Russia and Iran came in defense of Syria, and things went wrong for the United States. So when Russia and Iran came in serious defense, that meant that they could no longer really control the Middle East totally. So now Iran, like Russia, are a major obstacle for the United States, for the hegemon control of the Middle East. That the US controls the Middle East, that's not, that fact that the US is in control of the Middle East is not acceptable to Russia or China. That's the problem. Because that would be a death blow to the project of, all these emerging countries. The Middle East is not just another area of the world. You have to take into account the natural resources. It's very important economically. The zone is absolutely key because of its also geographical location, which is also very important. So Russia and China will never allow, let's put it that way, willingly allow the US to subjugate Iran. And if the US enters a war against Iran, two possibilities. If the US goes to war against Iran, either, I'm just putting two extreme examples. One, Iran defeats the US quickly and the US has to leave. Or, and this is the crucial point, if there is any hint that Iran is losing or is going to lose, Russia and China will enter the war. So that would mean a world war with the US. So this is the point, the conclusion. It is not for President Trump, it is not compatible to try to reach an agreement in Europe, an agreement about the Ukraine, and at the same time continuing to support or promote, that depends on how you look at it, either support or promote the war-mongering strategies of the Prime Minister of this country, in Israel. Netanyahu. So, in brackets now, in parentheses, in a war with Iran, if there was such a war and Iran won and Israel lost, hypothetically, obviously, hypothetically, the borders in Israel, just think about what could happen in that situation. Probably the borders now, or the borders that Israel has could not possibly remain as they are at the moment. They would probably ask them to, take them back to whatever, choose the year, what they were, 67, whenever. But that is difficult to imagine, because it is difficult imagining Israel losing the territories, accepting that, losing the territories and withdrawn from, to go back. That's impossible. Too humiliating, and it would be sort of an apocalyptic scenario. Okay, so, but there are a lot of things happening. Look, do you remember, okay. You remember from the Bible that story about King Solomon. You remember that there were two women. Each one of them said that the baby, this particular baby, belonged to them. Each one said that she was the mother of the baby, and they couldn't agree. Each one said, I am the mother. And so King Solomon said, all right, cut the baby in half and give each half to each woman. And the real mother said, no, give the baby to her. It's fine. And so King Solomon knew, because of that reaction, that she was the real mother. Do you remember that story? I remember it from when I was a child. It was very impressive. Okay, so you see, we have people in that area of the world that they are both fighting for the same land. Whose land does it belong to? The point is that the Palestinians are there and they're not leaving. They know they're going to die, I think. I think they're aware that they're going to die there, either with bombs or with starvation or with illnesses, whatever. And they stay. The problem is that already in this past year, I think 250,000 Israelis have left. So who is leaving and who is staying, no matter what? So, yes, more than 250,000 people have left Israel. So this is actually going to be a historic blow to this country, actually. Because this country, Israel, was based in attracting people of the Jewish religion, Jewish ethnicity, but Jewish religion or descent from all over the world, from Eastern Europe mainly. So it was not just ethnicity, it was religion. You remember in one of the videos I told you that in the, I think it was the 11th century, wasn't it? The 11th century, fighters, hordes of fighters from the east moved towards more and more Eastern Europe, the center of Europe. And they were They had no religion. The king decided that they needed a religion. They needed to settle down and have a religion. And they didn't want to become Christian because they would have to obey Constantinople. And they didn't want to become Muslim because they would have to obey Mecca, as it were. Okay, so they decided, okay, we'll become Jewish. And the king converted to Judaism, and the people followed. All right, so these are the people that from Eastern Europe now, many of them have come to Israel. All right, so, but this has been an effort to bring Jewish people to Israel for generations now. And the fact that they are now leaving it will prove a sort of a historic trauma for Israel. We'll have to see what happens. But in any case, in this war, perhaps to avoid, in the hypothesis that Iran won, okay, in that situation, we are examining all the possibilities here. In that first situation that Israel lost, perhaps there would have to be an international intervention agreed upon between the US and China and Russia to prevent, for example, another reverse genocide from occurring. Imagine if, we're talking about extreme situations, that all the Muslim states enter Israel, and that would become another humanitarian disaster. So that would have to be prevented, okay, if that happened. That's one thing that's happening with people leaving Israel. The other thing is, for example, the day before the election in the United States, the Prime Minister Netanyahu dismissed the defense minister Gallant, yeah? Was this a coincidence, the day before the election? Nothing is coincidence, no. The thing is that Gallant was, it seems, reports are that he was opposing Netanyahu's strategies from a military point of view. It looks as if there was a case. He was opposed to open intervention in Lebanon, for example, saying that it didn't make much military sense. Or the continuous escalation against Iran. His point, if we believe the sources, was that, look, we are finding it difficult here in Gaza and the West Bank, and we have our hands full here. Well, it's not only that, the Houthis and the North, and okay, so and now you want to attack Lebanon, you want to provoke Iran to attack. This makes no military sense from a military perspective. It didn't mean that he doesn't agree with the ultimate objectives, but from a military standpoint, perhaps he wanted a different strategy, who knows. But apparently they had tremendous rows, Netanyahu and Gallant. But of course the Prime Minister and the government won the argument, because to them it's not simply a military victory that they are after. Their stand we could say that is almost the contrary. Not a defeat, but that Israel will be in such a difficult position that would force the United States to come in. And this is a sort of a provocation mechanism that he's using. Gallant's dismissal shows the things are not good, because it means that what some commentators called a forward retreat. What is a forward retreat? That means whoever is the president, okay? That is why it was done the day before, methinks. But whoever is the president, one or the other, we are going to continue with the same strategy. And to show you that we mean it with this Miss Gallant, we are going to continue doing what we are doing. But this strategy needs the US to drag the US along. Of course, we shouldn't dismiss the possibility that during the next 2 months, there are still 2 months before inauguration. During the next 2 months, there might be some desperate moves. Desperate moves are made, either by Israel itself or by some other European powers. This should not be dismissed in order to try to force the situation before Trump takes office. But if that doesn't happen, and Trump assumes the presidency on the 20th of January, and say he did I say assume? He what's the word? Well, he becomes the president on the 20th of January. And he wants to reach an agreement about Ukraine with Russia. Then he will also need to slow down to stop Netanyahu. What do I mean? Not only to avoid escalation, but to force him to leave Gaza, to leave Lebanon and the West Bank. That would mean a horrific humiliation. It cannot be, it will not happen. So, a possible compromise could be to center the talk and the speech around Iran not obtaining nuclear weapons. That could be the very beginning. Everybody has to save face here. So, beginning, we will not allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons. Some people say they already have them or they are about to have them. But in any case, that could be the beginning of the conversation. President Trump has alluded to this in the last few days. There is a need, therefore, to bring peace to the Middle East. And we all agree with that, so the beginning of the conversation, and Iran will not have nuclear weapons. As I said, could be the beginning of a negotiation. And it could also be something that will allow President Trump to save face vis-a-vis Israel. But not sure if this would be enough to save Netanyahu's face. In his country, I suppose not. That would not be enough. So, Lebanon and Gaza. Lebanon and Gaza will not necessarily lead to a world war. But you see, the attack on Lebanon is not just because it is Lebanon next door. The attack on Lebanon is in order to provoke Iran. An attack against Hezbollah is a strategic attack so that Iran reacts. Okay. But the ultimate objective is to involve Iran in a war that will force the United States to get involved. To drag the United States to be involved, or, because the language is important here, or to provide the United States with a justification to get actively involved to attack Iran, so that if Iran is defeated, the United States will control the Middle East. I say this because for the last year we see that the United States is trying to play with words. It is obvious, isn't it? For the last year, we see the United States trying to appear moderate in words. They're always saying, yes, we are urging negotiations. We are, talking about the possibility of a ceasefire. All these words. But they're almost... if it wasn't so sad, it would be comedy, because the same day they're saying this, things like this, they are increasing economic aid and arms supplies and okay. So with that strategy, the Democrat government, the corporate world, Wall Street, okay, their strategy is to maintain control of the world at all costs. And they have that strategic goal of subduing or subjugating or defeating Iran by means of a double escalation to that effect. So, Ukraine on one side and Iran on the other. This could be a possible scenario by which Trump could slow down and stop Netanyahu. And it is this one. In order to cut off this, stop this escalation strategy, as I mentioned, to force or to persuade whatever Netanyahu to leave Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and as possible compensation, let us say, to offer that compromise guarantees that Iran will never have nuclear weapons. But for this, he would have to have enough support at home. In the past, he did not have it at all. Remember when he wanted to leave Syria and he told the military, we are leaving Syria. And the military said, well, you might be leaving, but we are staying. You leave. And there they stayed, actually stealing quite a little bit of oil, blatantly. But anyway, this support at home is essential. Will he be able to control the army? I mean, for the army to obey him, or his administration, the people around him, his country? Does he have enough support to do this, to persuade Netanyahu to different means, different ways? Because if not, everything collapses. The escalation continues in the Middle East, and goodbye also to the strategic agreement in Europe. Another hypothesis: war in Europe to the last European. We heard about the last Ukrainian. Well, I'm going to quote to you something. I didn't write down his name. I don't think it was in the little snippet of video that I saw, but this is a Russian analyst, and he's also a member of the Duma, the parliament in Russia. And he said the translation needed to be tidied up a little bit, but I think I know what he said. What he said literally was, the translation itself: Trump is not planning to resolve the problem in Ukraine. I'm quoting: Trump will continue to liquidate, that is the word that they use in the translation. Trump will continue to liquidate the Russian Federation. Or, as Putin says, Trump is no different to Biden in their objectives. Therefore, Trump's whole plan is not to solve anything, but a plan to eliminate Russia. It's links. What is behind such a plan? And then he actually explains what he thinks Trump's plan will be for these negotiations. What is behind the plan? Okay. And he says, first will be a so-called ceasefire without conditions. That is to say, Trump will grab Zelensky by the neck and when everything is ready, will say that Ukraine will create a ceasefire and, it will stop the killing of people right here and now, immediately, will stop in a day, a week, but immediately. And then, after that ceasefire first, then we'll start negotiating. Do you understand what he's saying? Yeah. So yes, he'll call for a ceasefire, and then after that, and then we'll negotiate. And he says this is what is called the Korean script. The Korean it has another name. The translation was script, but the Korean solution, something like that, because officially South and North Korea are still at war. There was a ceasefire and nothing else. Negotiations later, the negotiations never took place. So there they are. Literally, officially, it's still a ceasefire. Okay, so he says this is what is called the Korean solution. That is the first element to Trump's plan as he sees it. Then he says, the second element, this is going to sound strange, but he says this, he says that the US withdraws from NATO. The US withdrawing from NATO? Withdrawing for what? Well, you see, to exempt the US from the responsibility of future military actions of Europe against Russia. You have to understand that, he continues, you have to understand that European countries have no sovereignty. That is to say, Europe cannot say no to a war with Russia if the US says that that is what it has to do. The US will send them as shields because they are not allowed to make their own decisions. Everything is decided in Washington. Why is this important to the US? Russia is, he asks him, why is this important to the US? Well, Russia is the only country with nuclear weapons able to target and hit the US. If the US does not actively take part in the war, Russia will have no legal reasons to direct or to target or to use their weapons against the US. Consequently, the tools of strategic nuclear weapons can be used only against the US if they are actively in a war. If they are not actively in a war, why would you attack the US? You see? So it doesn't work against Europe because Europe has no independent sovereignty. The result is, he continues, it will die under Washington's orders. And it will be, Europe will be unable to say no, to die. It's obviously a little bit dramatic here, but you know what he's saying. The third element, sending troops to Ukraine. the building of a powerful military infrastructure to produce tomahawks and other weapons in the Ukraine. In other words, ceasefire, so that we have time to do all these things. You remember the Minsk Agreement? Oh, yes, the Minsk Agreement. Okay, yes, we agree, everything. And it was only to gain time to increase the forces and train them and so on. So a similar thing here. The fourth point, he says, then after preparing for a year or two, after preparing an offensive against Moscow, whether by European forces from Ukrainian territory or not, the US will play the role of a referee, the only way they want to be seen. In other words, not actively participating themselves. And he concludes, this is Trump's plan. In this sense, it is not a coincidence that Putin said Trump would be worse than Biden. Biden did not have this element of about a ceasefire as a way of covering the preparation of massive invasion of 1 million people in the Russian Federation. He's talking about 1 million people going into Russia. Where can we get in Europe 1 million people? I have heard John Ritter, excuse me, Mr. Ritter, Scott Ritter, saying, start counting. The United Kingdom can send, 70,000, 100,000 here at 1 million. It just seems so exaggerated. Where are we going to get 1 million soldiers from? But he says, yes, I'll talk about that 1 million a little bit later. I've got some notes here, but yes, the preparation of massive invasion of 1 million people to invade Russia. He says to change this plan, and he's speaking to fellow analysts when he's talking about this, and he says to change this plan, we as analysts must understand that to be ahead of this plan, to be on top of all this, we have to react in this manner. 1. Under no circumstances allow the US to untie itself or disengage itself or disassociate itself from the events in the Ukraine. Do not allow it to just leave and now leave Europe facing the whole thing. That's interesting. So I hope that I'm reading it okay. You understand, yeah, that this deputy, this parliamentarian, this analyst really is saying that the US will try to detach itself from NATO, and this attempt to negotiation, the US strategy here is not the end of the war, but to disengage from the war. That is, to find a context such that it justifies the US saying, okay, lads, to the Europeans, we are leaving. There you are. Good luck. It's in your hands now. Which is a little bit unfair, and unfair is not the right word, because, they're the one who started it. Started the whole thing, and now it's like Pontius Pilate saying, do what you will, or rather, and this is the point, what we from a distance will be telling you what to do, and we know that you will obey. So The U.S. is making a sort of a negotiating sweet deal, really, of a negotiation. And that cannot be acceptable to Russia. But they can say, the U.S. can say, well, we tried, and the whole enchilada will be passed on to Europe now to sort out under their command. They'll continue, however, to pull the strings, and the European countries themselves will continue in the same process of escalation against Russia as they were before. Let me get a glass of water. In other words, once Ukraine has fallen, to do their intention, he maintains, this deputy. The U.S. intention would be more or less, perhaps not, in this direct way, but in any case, it would end up being something like to do with Western and Central Europe what they did with Ukraine. That they have used Ukrainians till the end to wear down Russia. And now that the Ukraine has fallen, let's do the same with Europe. And that withdrawal from NATO is what would allow the US to dodge the bullet, as it were. If this is going to degenerate into a full-scale nuclear war, it would be between Russia and Europe. Because the US would have not intervened, you see, they would have been out. So, to the last Ukrainian, to the last European, how long? In any case, even if that took place, the official withdrawal from NATO, the interest of the global elite would continue the same. They would formally withdraw in such a way that there would be no justification for Russia to attack the US in case of an explosion of war. So, what I have been saying so far is obviously many hypotheses here. But, they are hypotheses, but there is a possibility, could be one or two could be reasonable. But even if they were reasonable, we have to be careful because we cannot rule out the possibility of a certain degree of staging or false flagging or all that sort of thing, certainly in the next 2 months. European NATO, just the European NATO, does not have the capacity by itself to confront Russia effectively. We know that. But nevertheless, it might have the capacity to wear it down. And this parliamentarian, this analyst, spoke of 1 million soldiers. And that seems impossible if you count the availability at the moment, right now. But there are countries that are preparing, and preparing very well. Poland, for example, or the Nordic countries, or Romania. The thing is that they have... The problem with this is that at the same time that they're preparing, they're actually wearing down also their stocks, yeah? But if you were to come to invade with 1 million soldiers, Russia could very well say, well, look, we don't want to be worn down anymore. You know, we're both wearing each other down. We're not interested in this anymore. The possibility of using tactical nuclear weapons would exist if Europe attacks with, you know, if the escalation is so great that Europe attacks with this 1 million or whatever the number might be. Of course, there is another hypothesis too, but I don't think it would work now. They left it too late, and that would be to buy off Russia. So to separate Russia from China and Iran, that I think is impossible now. So that if Russia is not involved, they would have a free reign there in the Middle East too. More of a, you know, they could have more free hands, more of a free hand to act. That's almost impossible now. But anyway, the attack with 1 million soldiers, let's say 1 million to agree with him, round numbers, whatever. What would happen then is obviously a scenario difficult to foresee, but it would be a wearing down on both sides. And the US, a war of attrition on both sides. It doesn't make sense. And the US, if everything went according to their plan, the US would be free of it, provisionally, temporarily at any rate. Though the US weapons industry would continue to profit, of course. So, conclusion. In this situation, the US obviously would avoid sending regular troops, precisely to avoid risking to be attacked by Russia. This is the hypothesis. But it is essential to maintain a certain degree of distrust, at least, in what we are being told. Certainly in the face of that optimism about the possibility of Trump solving everything more or less quickly in just a few days. The thing is, this is the problem. The thing is that if he wants to end up with the Ukrainian thing, and let's say that he's successful, everyone agreed to everything, fantastic, okay, he cannot at the same time escalate in the Middle East. Why? Because the objective in the Middle East is Iran. And the moment he, okay, so he agrees with Russia here about Ukraine, but there he's attacking, they are attacking Iran, and so Russia will come to the aid of Iran and China. Always, because that is the way of preventing the United States to control the Middle East and the rest of it. So, do you see that there is a disparity here? So there is a problem here. That is why I said there is a hole in your bucket, dear Donald, dear Donald. There is a hole in your bucket, and the hole is Iran. Goodbye. I'm in better spirits today.